All right, why don't we go and call tonight's work session to order? Tonight, we will be doing the coronavirus state and local fiscal recovery funds from the American Rescue Plan. Discussion with the Budget Committee. Alexandra.
Yes, Mayor and Council. So we are back to discuss the remaining ARPA funds that are available to be allocated. We do have members of the Budget Committee present, and I am going to hand it over to Huel. He's going to walk you through the staff report and the remaining requests, and you can discuss at your leisure.
All right, thank you, Mayor, Council. So we are back again with the next iteration of the ARPA funds breakdown. So just, I'm going to recap a couple of the highlights here. So we've updated the list based on the last meeting that we had. There's been a couple of new requests added from the Police Department and Public Works. The total amount received was about 1.68 million. Total allocated to date is 1.04 million. That leaves $636,077 left to allocate. As you can see, the total request range is about 1.1 to 1.4 million. In terms of at this stage, do you have any questions before I turn it over to the chief? All right, Chief, Val is going to take items 1 and 2. Here.
So in order to keep up with the best practices, oh, I'm sorry, is it on? We had been pretty much non-compliant with the evidence room before I got here. So we're able to secure an evidence tech for 2 days a week, which would get us up to best practices, best standards. So we'd be looking to further fund her. So it's going to cost, and I think we figured it out, about 15,000 to get us through to the new budget year. Then we would request to keep it going, but we're so backlogged and there's no one here that knows how to do evidence at all. The one person that is on leave. So we'd be requesting the funds to fund that position so that we could get up to speed and get the evidence room taken care of. And then the second item we'll get right into is we don't have the capabilities for field training. So we're going to send 2 of our recruits into the academy in December and 1 in February. And we have no field training officers here that will be eligible to train them. And Forest Grove was kind enough to offer us that solution. We're not quite sure where financially it's going to fit in, but that's the ballpark we're figuring because they're going to want us to cover any overtime expenses, et cetera, to train our 2 officers. And this way they'll come back fully trained. Otherwise, they get out of the academy and they sit. So that's kind of where we're at with that.
The part-time evidence, how many hours a week is 15,000?
16 hours.
16 hours a week, but that's just for the rest of the fiscal year.
Yes, sir.
Okay, and then it will be implemented into a position within the police department?
Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you.
You had mentioned the person that was taking care of the evidence room is out or unavailable or on leave. And so this was something that it's not like we didn't have someone taking care of evidence. It's just come to a point in time where now we don't and we need to fill in.
I think that was also a part of the problem.
Okay.
Yes. So it was a lingering problem.
Mm-hmm.
Just got worse.
Mm-hmm.
Any other questions? Sir.
I have a question. Chief, is that part of another job? Will this be a person or this will be just this one person doing this amount of work?
That's all they will do is the evidence room.
Okay. Do you expect to have any problems finding someone?
We found someone already that was willing to take
Okay.
on the position that's already doing that for the sheriff's office.
Okay, okay, great. Okay.
And they come in high regard.
Yeah, I know.
Mr. Brandon.
Thank you. So with this being only, I mean, it's less than a 0.5 position, is the idea that they would be an unrepresented temporary employee at that 15 hours, 16 hours a week? Or would there be other representation so that that employee would be considered a long-term employee where potentially there's benefits eligibility or other things of that nature?
The employee doesn't want any benefits. It'll be strictly part-time and as far as I know, non-represented.
Thank you.
There is PERS involved. Because this person gets PERS at the county, so would get PERS.
Jeanette?
Yes, first of all, I'm not happy to hear that we don't have a up-to-date evidence room, but so just to clarify a little bit of that position, I know you guys, part of the council has been asking about hours, but for how long is this going to, I guess, 15 to 16 hours a week, but will this support the objective? Would this fix the problem, the 15,000, or is just this part of the funds that's going to be matched with other dollars?
This should get us to next year so that we can actually make it a position in the budget.
I see. Thank you.
Swear.
Councilor Miller?
On the field training officer cost of $20,000, is that going to be combined with something else, or is $20,000 what the estimate is in total for the FTOs?
We're working on the estimate right now. Not quite sure. That's about a rough estimate.
That is anticipated to be the total, though.
Is it sounding like Forest Grove do we have a good chance of that happening? I mean, I guess, do we have a backup plan if this doesn't work? And is $20,000 going to cover our backup plan if this doesn't work?
So right now, based on conversations with Forest Grove, it sounds like by the time our recruits would get out of the academy, they would have the capability to do the field training for us. At that point too, I think we actually might have one officer. Yes, one officer here that would actually have gone through FTO or have the FTO certification and be eligible. Right now, he's already been through the FTO program, but he's not eligible because according to the CBA, he needs to be on the job for 3 years and he has not been yet. So we would technically have someone available after April. And then Forest Grove does feel confident that come this spring, they would have some field training officers available.
Okay, thank you.
I have a question. How much time is involved with field training? You've got to go to the academy, then they have to have field training. So there's two components to their training.
It's 16 weeks,
15 weeks. So
16.
16 weeks. They basically kind of just learn what to do when they're on the job and they are mentored by somebody. And is that kind of what we're looking at?
That's when you learn the job.
Yeah.
In field training.
Great. Thank you.
Any other questions?
Right, so moving down the list, item 3 was the frontage improvements for proposed affordable housing development from Columbia County Habitat for Humanity. Their original request was $282,000 and $282,035, and they were requesting that those funds to build their public improvements that would be required as a part of the development of their project. On item 4, you'll see the Oak and Myrtle Street water mains listed as alternative. When we met last, that was something that we brought to you all as a consideration. Both Oak Street and Myrtle Street have undersized old water lines. Oak Street is a 2-inch steel line. It's one of the older ones in our system. It was constructed at some point in the middle of the 1960s. It is slated for replacement according to our master plan between now and the next 7 to 8 years. Additionally, Myrtle Street, which the property that Columbia County Habitat for Humanity now owns, actually fronts on both of those streets. Now, Myrtle Street is also an undersized line, but there's a combination of 4 and 6-inch lines between 3rd Street and Southeast Sawyer, or Northeast Sawyer, excuse me. At the conclusion of the last meeting, council had requested that we do some cost estimating and figure out with a certain degree of accuracy what that might cost. Based on the bids we received back for a recent waterline construction project that closed about a week and a half ago, we went ahead and calculated what those cost estimates would be. Came out to about $250,000 for completing the engineering, procuring materials, and the construction labor for Oak Street, which is slightly longer than Myrtle Street, about $248,000 for Myrtle. Now, if Public Works had to pick one of those projects as to which one we think is more important, it's certainly Oak Street, just due to its age, the material. It's an ODS steel rather than the cast iron and ductile iron on Myrtle. I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have about this in particular.
Peter, you recommended that we don't go with number 3, right? That was kind of contrary to what you thought was within the guidelines.
Right, and there have been some guidance that have come out since then. But I would just say that given that the oak is within our planning, and that this is water, which is one of the things that's specifically allowed, this is significantly lower risk from a legal perspective than 4 would be. Myrtle would also be lower risk, or excuse me, Myrtle would also be lower risk than 3. But I think if we look at the totality of them, really Oak is the one that checks as many boxes as possible.
Thank you.
It's important to note, and again, if this wasn't clear in the staff report, any development that occurs at that property that Habitat for Humanity owns, they will be required to upsize a portion of the line that serves their property on their frontage. Now, in a circumstance like that, we get segments of newer lines at a larger size, but they wouldn't be on the hook for replacing all of Oak Street. So we would have this patchwork of a 2-inch line coming into, 8-inch, which is our standard, and then back down to a 2-inch line on the other side of their property. And so in those circumstances, the city would want to make sure we're thinking strategically about where these improvements need to happen from a public standpoint.
I have another question.
Sorry.
These are estimates on these here. So what if it comes more or less? How do we deal with that?
In terms of less in used for these funds, that's a discussion we could have with Peter. If it's more, the city does budget annually for water line replacements. It's something that Public Works has really been adamant on moving forward. We want to get a water line replaced every year, just so we can start addressing maintenance backlogs. That being said, this is a line that is old enough that if it were to fail at some point, the city doesn't have much of an option. It would have to be repaired. So in this sense, it's preemptive. I don't know if that answers your question at all. Or...
Yes.
Mr. Mayor? Sure. Huel, I don't recall, as far as number 3 is concerned, with the Habitat for Humanity request, that did not include any part of upgrading Oak Street or Myrtle Street. Is that correct?
Their request was for their frontage improvements, which includes sewer, water, streets, which in this instance would be sidewalk, curb, and gutter.
What I'm getting at, let me kind of focus it a little bit. What I'm getting at is we would not be addressing any of Habitat for Humanity's original request by upgrading Oak Street or Myrtle Street. Is that accurate?
Not quite. It gets at some of their request. So they wouldn't be conditioned to replace an entire line on an entire street. They would be required to place a portion that serves their development that's on that water main.
Okay, and what I'm asking is their original 282,035 request, did that include any of that aspect?
As far as I know, in looking back at calling the conversations with Habitat, they didn't have at least I don't remember seeing a specific estimate as to the line items. I mean, we can certainly look for that, but again, that estimate is a bit out of date and
Okay, I just wanted the clarity in my head that we weren't, if we were to choose to fund Oak Street or Myrtle Street, that we wouldn't be actually cutting into any of Habitat for Humanity's requests of the 282,000. Thank you.
Peter?
So since we originally got Habitat request, we've gotten bids on various water projects and I've seen them for other cities as well. And what I can tell you is they're coming in significantly higher than engineers have budgeted for. And so both the Oak and the Myrtle are based on the bids that we got a week and a half ago. And between the low and the high was over $100,000 is my recollection. So I think if you guys were to want to go with option 3, it might make sense for staff to take a look at that again, because I think that number would probably be a lot higher than what was estimated if the bids continue coming in at the amount that they've been coming in at.
Peter?
But we could just allocate a certain amount of money to that project, and then if it was over that, they would be responsible to cover that.
Oak Street, replacing the Oak Street water line would be a city project.
I actually thought when Peter said maybe go with number 3 there,
Okay.
any of that, we would give this amount to them or whatever amount we decided to give. And if it came out more than that, they would be responsible to come up with that difference.
That's correct.
And Peter, are you okay with doing 3?
I mean, if the time came for us to defend the allocation, I feel that 4 Oak is the most legally defensible, 4 Myrtle is the second, and then the third option 3, we'd want more robust findings about that. And we have gotten some additional clarity as to affordable housing since even the final Treasury regulations came out. But again, I really think that because Oak is on our list of projects to replace already, that it's very, very cleanly into the ARPA.
Thank you. Let's start with Jeanette. Jeanette?
Thank you. Yes. I guess maybe I don't have this documentation in front of me, but the only documentation I have from the Habitat for Humanity is the letter that was sent October 1st, 2021. And it does describe the amount of 282,035, but everything is, all the amounts is talking about property and purchasing of the property. I don't see anything regarding the Myrtle or Oak. The only thing I see referred to it is Exhibit B, which shows the the diagram. But other than that, I don't see any documentation. Am I missing something?
When they mention in that paragraph where they have that amount listed, it's in addition to the land cost, it's the offsite construction costs that they're asking to consider. And that's what I was referring to when I mentioned frontage improvements, public improvements that developments are required to construct for the benefit of the public.
So just for my sake, just to clarify, so what we're talking about is has nothing to do with purchasing of the property. It's mostly of dealing with the water mains on Myrtle and Oak. Is that correct?
In terms of what Public Works request for Oak and or Myrtle Street, yes. The funds the 282,000 that Habitat for Humanity mentioned has nothing to do with purchasing property. They in fact have acquired the property already.
Okay, okay, just wanted to clarify because it's not clear for me, but thank you.
But so Oak was something that was on this card,
Oh, yes, yes,
budget saving
correct.
essentially.
Correct. At some point, the line will need to be replaced. It's just a matter of when precisely and how much. I mean, obviously, if the longer time goes on, costs will go up over time. But yes, you're correct.
What would be Habitat's share of the Oak Street line? Because obviously you said that, well, they're not conditioned to pay the whole thing. So what would be their share? Because that's what we're really looking at. We're trying to help Habitat, so we need to know that amount.
We do not have that information in front of us. I don't know if Habitat does either, just in the sense that they would have to get some way through the process to decide, in the design process as to where those or what the extent of those improvements would be, and then what it would cost them to construct.
It's based
Well-
on their frontage, right?
Right. I think our thinking though was that if we did do the Oak Street line project, that whatever portion of that line went in front of their frontage improvements, that we would cover the cost of replacing that whole line. So that's how we would be helping them, is that then they wouldn't have that cost for whatever, however many feet of pipe would be in front of their frontage. And so that was kind of the win-win there. We have a water line replaced and then they get that cost taken off their project.
I understand. I think it's a great plan too.
Oh.
I just would like to know how much are we saving them?
Oh,
I think that's important because they've
I mean-
asked for 285,000 or something like that, 82,000. I just wondering how much of that are we saving for them?
we'd have to break down, how many feet would be their responsibility versus the, cost per whatever foot that we would actually end up paying once we got real bids.
Just looking at that street, it's less than half of that.
Small portion.
Right.
Mr. Mayor,
Counselor.
I think this was already said, so I apologize if it was. Just for clarification, did Habitat for Humanity know that either one of these water lines was going to need to be replaced for them to be able to develop?
Oh, yes.
Okay. So I just want to make sure that we're talking through this and due diligence here, because they have spent a lot of time on this. They've appeared in front of us on multiple occasions. They've brought legal counsel in. So I just want to make sure that whatever we do here is they're hearing this, that we're trying to make an effort to help them. Thank you.
Yeah, and I think the big concern here for them is that they just are in that unusual spot where they have frontage on both sides of the property that they have to do versus one. So it's just really expensive.
Thanks.
Seeing no questions, I'll move on to item number 5. So this is the new item that we've added. So at the last council meeting on October 17th, Public Works Director and the wastewater treatment supervisor, as well as our wastewater treatment phase 1 improvements engineer, Consor engineers, met with you to discuss the biosolids dryer and the cost escalation we're seeing there from the manufacturer of the dryer model. So one thought that we had here in order to make up some of that anticipated budget shortfall is to request some, whatever funds council is willing to allocate to these wastewater infrastructure projects. Currently, the biosolids dryer was funded with $1.9 million of grant funds from the state. We have the Headworks and Grit Chamber that was funded with $2.2 million, and the Smith Road Pump Station at $900,000. We have been, obviously, the cost of the dryer, as you saw at the last meeting, has increased substantially. Know that both the Public Works Director and Treatment Supervisor are confident we can bring that cost down a little bit. But that is a work in progress. And so staff wanted to gauge council's interest in allocating some of the ARPA funds to wastewater infrastructure projects, particularly projects that we have grant funded. They're confirmed by the state and we need to get those designed and constructed within the time frame of that grant. Estimated budget shortfall for this project inclusive of engineering design, procurement of the dryer, civil site improvements for the building, any sort of improvements that need to be made physically to the plant to house the new equipment. That shortfall currently is at 400,000 if the dryer remains at that $1.66 million price tag. Any amount of ARPA funds that are allocated to wastewater or water infrastructure projects means that that's funding that we don't have to go seek from increasing an SRF loan or which is ultimately borne by the ratepayers in the long run.
Carol, I have a question for you. So if I'm understanding you all correctly, this is a need that we have, but we have absolutely $0 in the budget for it. Is that correct?
I didn't get the details, I'm sorry, until
Okay.
tonight, so, but I can get that.
No, it's fine. I'm just trying to understand. It seems that we are short $400,000. I heard that correctly?
Based on the cost estimates.
Based
as
on the
they're
cost
coming
estimate.
back
Great.
now.
Everything's been coming in so much higher.
The only option I'm hearing is with the loan and perhaps something going to ratepayers. I'm just curious, where do we sit with our contingency as a city and when do we tap into that?
Bring the contingency numbers with me. Them, do you know them off? The top of your head?
I don't know them off the top of my head, but each fund is going to have some amount of contingency built
Right.
into it.
Yep.
So you'd be looking at, the contingency in the wastewater fund, which again, I don't have right in front of me, but you'd be either looking at something like that, or as Huel said, looking to increase our loan, which
Okay.
then ultimately borne by the taxpayers.
Sure.
There is quite a bit of money in a lot of the.
Yes, I mean, we do budget conservatively. It's not that maybe it'd be impossible maybe to absorb those costs, but as with anything, when you're dipping into contingency like that, that's just less beginning cash for the next year. It has a trickle down effect.
Yeah.
So we did feel like knowing that some of those costs were coming at us and there were still ARPA money
Sure.
available, we just felt that it was
Mhm.
kind of incumbent upon us at least to bring up the fact that
Part of the
this
budget.
could be a good use.
That's okay.
Carol, what's the difference between our reserve fund and our contingency fund?
Bear with me, I'm
I'm
still
sorry. yeah.
learning a lot.
I know you're new.
So I
I've
have
been here longer than you and I don't know, so.
This is a really good, these are really good lessons for
Yeah.
me because I know what to expect next time I'm under, in here. The- I don't know. We don't have anything that we really call reserve fund.
So they're essentially the same thing. We're just interchanging the words.
We call.
I kind of thought that was probably the case. They just
Yeah.
used.
So yeah, sorry to use different jargon there, but yes, they're essentially the same thing.
Thank you. She helps me out with all that stuff from last year, right?
And I think the important thing to note here is I think the scenario would be a bit different if this was if we had one wastewater infrastructure project the city was doing in a span of a few years. But the scenario is quite different in the sense that we have several major wastewater
Yes.
infrastructure projects coming in the pipeline. And this is simply the first that we've actually seen some kind of current burst coming back on.
Any additional grants out there available?
So with grants, when it came to wastewater, we actually really didn't qualify. Our median income is too high, so the best we could do was loans, essentially. They had good rates. But yeah, when it came down to it, we just could not qualify for any grants. We sat down with the state funders. We had a big group, they call it a one-stop meeting, where you have all these different folks come in from different state agencies to talk to you, and it's just too much money in the community. We don't qualify. And then we can't get community development block grants either.
So just for the budget numbers, the wastewater contingency is 1.1, a little over 1.1 million. I'm not sure how much of that is just contingency versus that, and then the wastewater SDC fund is 479,000. That's just the raw contingency numbers in the budget. Just so
Thank you.
Welcome.
You beat me to it.
it's on our website, so it makes it easy. Bring it up on the phone.
Bring my computer.
And that's just what was budgeted, so I don't know if there's been any
Correct. Yeah,
overruns or
that's
what.
what's budgeted, and then we know that, yeah, and we fully expect, though, unfortunately, that there's probably gonna be other increased costs that we're seeing. As we're seeing bids come in for projects across the board, regardless of what they are, when it comes to any kind of infrastructure projects, they're way higher than we're expecting. I mean, this has happened to us now already twice recently. The Smith Row Pump Station came in, how much? That was 150
was-
over?
That was the RFP for the
Right.
design, which is
Even that came in.
over the estimate
Yeah.
that was in the master
Then the construction bid for the line replacement,
for Bella Vista.
yeah, that came in at what, 100 and some over?
Over $100,000.
Yeah, over the
anticipated.
estimates.
I also feel like we have such aging like some of these streets, as you're talking about the types of pipes that still remain under the ground, there will be pipes, I mean, they've happened in the past, that are going to burst. And it might seem like contingency is heavy and we're in a really good place, but it is for those opportunities that is sitting there because those events will happen, unfortunately.
Correct.
And they will need to be taken care of immediately. I see this as an opportunity to help us in those future situations, as well as not put a burden on the taxpayers at this time. That's how I'm interpreting this opportunity.
So yes, I would agree with that.
That Councilperson Grayson, that's exactly far more eloquently said than what I did, but
Oh, no.
yes.
I'm just repeating to make sure I'm getting.
So Huels, as you've indicated, right, we're seeing on infrastructure projects, cost increases a lot more than what we were even planning for. And so reason I would assume material costs are increasing rapidly. So as you're indicating, the sooner that we're able to address these infrastructure projects, it's to also help alleviate the inflation associated so that when we are maybe 3-5 years down the line and planning to do this work, it will be a cost savings that would be passed on to us as taxpayers. So I appreciate that. And knowing what these dollar value requests are, I mean, even though the department is asking for, say, 400,000, if we only come in with 200,000, is that going to sit in contingency until those extra dollars are available? Or are there ways that we're being creative and being able to get this out in front?
There are ways that we're creative about maximizing saving the funds, the taxpayers' funds. This is one of those examples where the infrastructure projects that are ongoing, we're just now kicking into this, high gear for engineering design. All of the projects are not going to go to construction at the same exact time. They'll be staggered, but this gives that flexibility to, as Council President Grayson mentioned, not dip into a contingency fund in order to fund a new capital project, because there are, we want to make sure we have funds to cover emergencies when they come up.
Any other questions? Thank you. Gil.
I just
Moving on.
want to make a point, in being in the industry, I've been hearing that actually construction work is actually gone up about 30%. Just, we can keep that in mind as a city when we're
That's-
budgeting for our projects.
Counselor Santiago, that's That's almost exactly what we're seeing is right around that, the 25 to 35%. Depending on the project.
Because we should keep that in mind when we're budgeting.
Thank you, Jeanette.
Right, moving on to item 6, was a request from Columbia County, or from Columbia Economic Team with the county. It was for a Columbia County Advanced and Additive Manufacturing Small Business Incubator. I haven't heard anything else.
Have not. And, as Paul mentioned, this was an opportunity that we wanted to bring to you all because there had been a mention of a small business incubator on the goal list. And I think kind of recognizing as staff that we don't necessarily have the capacity to make that happen at the city level. So this was an opportunity to contribute some funds at a local level to something that might help local businesses. However, even when Paul came, he did mention that, of all your list of items, it wasn't necessarily the highest priority. We did leave it on there just because there had been a request to remove it. But again, this was just trying to acknowledge and find creative ways to meet your goal list. So if it's not something you want to move forward with, I think he'll, as he said, he'll figure it out and he'll be able to move forward. So.
And the last item, number 7, was the premium pay discussion. Staff received a letter from a group of residents requesting the city consider some sort of incentive to address staffing issues with the police department. And additionally, staff received a letter from the city's AFSCME employee union urging council to consider premium pay for city employees. So what we did is we calculated 3 different options, cost to the city just based on those amounts, and then what the payroll expenses would be. I'm happy to answer any questions you might have on the calculation if you're interested.
Any questions?
Is this
What's-
like city, I'm sorry, is this city, just the city staff? Is this city police department only? Is this across the board?
City staff inclusive of the police department.
Okay,
With exceptions, you'll see 27 employees there on that list, and that's because we had to create some sort of eligibility framework here in order to come up with a calculation. And so employees that worked in person between March 2020 and March 2022, and were still currently employed with the city would be eligible. And there's a couple of exclusions, open positions, and the city manager and chief of police were not included in that calculation either.
Yeah, I was going to ask in regards to department heads or unrepresented staff, if they would be eligible. I appreciate you identifying both city manager position, the chief's position. Is that the intention that it would also be a bonus for, or premium pay for department heads and unrepresented administrative staff? Yes, thank you.
Okay, well, I guess I'll be the bad guy here, and I'm getting used to it. But I just don't think this is in the spirit of the way these funds are supposed to be used. And I think that these funds should be allocated as they are designed to for the people that hit the hardest and the people that are affected the most by COVID. And I don't think that our city staff has been. I want to see our city staff paid the best they can possibly be paid. But I want to see these funds used the way they're supposed to be used, and in my opinion. And I think we have so many entities out there in this community that have, we have our retail workers facing the public every day, exchanging money, exchanging this. And we have our healthcare workers, particularly our people that are working in the nursing homes and working with seniors, that they don't have the option to close things down. We closed our offices down during the peak of COVID when the fears were the greatest. And I'm just saying, I think that these funds could be used somewhere else, more in the spirit of way these funds are designed to be used, in my opinion.
Any other questions or thoughts,
Um,
Council President?
Specifically to that one or the whole discussion?
The whole discussion.
I'm just looking at the clock with 20 minutes. I don't know if we should just go through each one and decide if we want to keep it on the list or remove it on the list. And then we can decide how much we want to allocate, if any. I mean, it's up to you, but I just,
No, that,
some sort of a,
go ahead. That actually works. Good, Brandon.
I'd just really like to hear the budget committee's ideas and thoughts around this before I make any moves on how much money would be potentially allocated.
thank you.
I think we talked at a prior meeting that the premium pay is.
Hey, Dan, could you make sure?
Oh, sorry.
That's
Chris.
okay. That's half my job. Yeah, Chris, I thought it said,
I think the premium pay was something that other communities have used.
Right, so this is something that was specifically designed as a use for the ARPA funds and called out as a use for those funds. And I can't speak to every community that used it, but it wasn't uncommon.
I was just gonna say, I think, I've done a lot of work with ARPA and where I call it PCC where I work, and it definitely was for premium pay for in-person, those that that couldn't work from home, that had to work during the pandemic. And, there was a lot of stress put on, especially our public safety officers that, they were out working with people that probably had COVID. And so I see it as appropriate from my standpoint. I know that we did it at the college. And it was just though, like you put here, for in person, those that couldn't, that even though offices were closed, they had to work in person. So I think it's from my standpoint.
I have a question for the committee. Do you see anything on the list that we've talked about tonight that you don't think either fits or something that we should hold off on and pay ourselves?
I think that I'm concerned of hiring someone for the part-time evidence technician if there's no real plan to keep them on. 'Cause I know that's one thing in the ARPA regulations talking about. It can't be like hiring someone unless there are plans to be able to keep that on in the budget.
There are plans to keep them on. We just need to get them to the next budget year.
I just think it would be nice to, I don't know if, I was just kind of doing some calculations, but it'd be nice to be able to keep 400,000 for the wastewater. Is a lot, but it'd be nice to at least, keep maybe up to half of that or close to half. If some of the other things are going to be approved, it'd be nice to see that go to that.
Is this thing on?
Yeah,
Okay.
you have to talk right into it though.
Okay. My question is, what's the possibility of keeping these all on the list and then just reducing the amount of money per item? Would that be something you guys would at least think about?
Mr. Mayor. I was actually going to bring that up. Thank you. There's two items on here that I don't know that we could reduce because of just by nature. And that is number one, which is the part-time evidence technician, and two, the field training officer. But the rest of the items on here, what's to keep us from leaving them all on here? Most of these have made it this far. Some of them are, admittedly new items, but to Rita's point, there's nothing keeping us from just reducing the percentage that's allocated to them and keeping them all on the list, if that's something that we have a consensus for.
They're all good projects. There's no question about it, and they're needed obviously too. But we might be able to figure out a way to keep them all and within reason.
Certainly, and the percentage could be dictated by what we all agree is, there's some that are more important than others. Admittedly, I think we could probably all agree to that, and the percentage that's allocated to him could be representative of that.
So why don't we start with Jeanette? She's got her hand up. Jeanette?
Thank you, Mayor. So I think I'm just kind of comment on Councilor McHugh. I understand where you're coming from. I know that personally working with a lot of small businesses, and especially in the retail and food industry that suffered during the pandemic. I would love, I'm just remind me, first of all, who came up with the list? Was there is some type of process that people said, oh, can we put you on the list as part of ARPA funds? Did the city come up with the list? Remind me of that process, please. And wondering if maybe some of the funds that would be for CCET can possibly go to our local businesses instead of, I mean, the incubator is great project, but maybe going to our local retailers and local restaurants that suffered and still suffering from this pandemic.
Sure. Councilor Santiago, I think I can address your question there, and Peter or Alex might jump in. The list was built based on requests as they came in. Some of these, you're right, are from staff. Things like the requests from the police department or Oak Street, Myrtle Street. That was. Again, what I'm getting at is these were all prompted. Some of the things have come off the list based on decisions by council or indications at the last meeting of things that the council didn't seem they wanted to fund at all.
I think she wants to know how 27 made the premium pay list. What was the criteria? So it looks like, Jeanette, how it says they had to work in person between March 2020 to March 2022,
Okay.
and they still have to be employed here. That's how they made the list.
Yeah, so ultimately what I'm saying is the funds that we need to use for these ARPA funds can, first of all, thank you for answering my question as far as how they got on the list. But for example, if we are talking about modifying the amount in some of these, like some of them, obviously we can't. But for example, if we do plan to give even some amount to CCET, is there a way that we can work with them in supporting our local businesses in these industries, especially in the food industry? I think they suffered the most. A lot of them are still even having trouble on staffing and opening up regular hours since prior to the pandemic.
So Jeanette, not only did Columbia County Economic Team put out massive grants, but we did too. And in fact, the last time that the restaurants got shut down, we pivoted and gave, I believe, 7 restaurants $5,000
Yes.
grants.
We actually had about 75,000 plus that we
Yeah.
used out of the previous COVID funds we received for small business grants.
Yeah, so we already been there. In fact, I remember going personally into many of the restaurants and bars that were getting closed down and giving them the applications because we had to do it on a dime because that last shutdown right before Christmas happened.
Yeah, during that 2-week.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So there's been a lot of money that has been already directed in that way.
Mm-hmm. But is
Be-
there,
between-
I mean, have they been notified that there's still possibly money that they can still have access to?
Not from the city, no. I think they were grateful for the monies that they got. And we did coordinate with Columbia County Economic Team to
Did.
make sure there wasn't like double grants. Because some people had applied directly with CCET and then others.
Well, and then we had, I believe with our program, we actually didn't have as many applicants as we could have. So we actually helped the county because they had too many. So we went to CET and helped them with their program. So we actually covered quite a bit of ground with those programs.
Okay, well, all right. Well, thank you.
Brandon.
Yeah, Mr. Mayor, I would like to throw out some tentative proposed numbers to be mindful of the time and also potentially be able to finish this out before the work session. If there are no other questions, and if that's okay with all members.
Go ahead.
All right, so I would say I support the 15,000 for investigation room, 20,000 as requested for the police department and their FTO training services. I'd really like to see some great documentation in regards to the MOU, and if something is to happen, that we can recoup on those dollars as well if it doesn't pan out like we were hoping for. I'd like to propose 200,000 to Habitat for Humanity. I'd also like to propose 175,000 to the city for the Oak Street project. I would also like to propose 150,000 for the number 5 wastewater infrastructure project. Number 6 for Columbia Economic Team, I'd like to propose 50,000. And finally, for premium pay, I would like to propose a $500 premium pay bonus at approximately 18,000, creating a grand total of 628,000, which is under the $636,077. It's just proposals, just to get some numbers going.
Council President.
I'm in favor of funding number 1 and 2 at the full cost. I'm also in favor of a small amount for number 3, but I would prefer if all of the 250 was allotted to Oak Street. Number 5, I'm still wavering on a number, but I am not interested in allocating any funds to number 6. And I'm wavering on allocating anything to number 7 as well. My personal opinion is that so far what we've approved on our list in terms of what we gave to CET in the fire district and what we've done for water meter replacement and patrol vehicle. We did do the YMCA after school program, but I do feel like we've been really mindful of picking projects that affect a larger scale of the community. And I'd like to stick with that lens. And I'm not quite sure for me that premium pay meets that lens for me.
Mr. Mayor. Hold on. Is that Josh?
It is.
Josh?
Sorry.
Yeah, so for me, definitely 1 and 2, I think fulfill some needs that we have identified in our community as a huge need in the police department, and increasing our coverage, even if it's inside the office side, which doesn't pull people aside and helps get some of the work that is not getting done. I think those are great uses of the ARPA funds. And then I think that personally, the frontage or the improvements for Oak Street and Maple would be a good use of the funds, and also help the Habitat for Humanity as well, but also reducing some of the costs to the taxpayers going forward. And then number 5 in the wastewater infrastructure, I would like to, as much money as we can towards that, because that would also help reduce the burden on our taxpayers and on our ratepayers. So for me, those are my priorities.
Pete?
Yeah, one of the letters we received was from 5 citizens concerned about the amount of police coverage we had. And that was certainly a valid concern. And I know we're addressing that, and Chief's doing all he can do to bring us up where we would like to be. But still, I'm wondering if any of these funds could be used in some manner toward the police department. Now, we had talked about previously premium pay for police and fire, but we don't have any police that were working during that time, as I recall. And so it didn't really fit. And it did seem like the right thing to do. and Fire has said that they appreciated all the funds that come from ARPA already, and they weren't looking for any additional funds. That's what Chief told me. So anyway, I'm wondering out loud here, is there a way, and Chief, can you think of a way that some funding could be used, and Peter, that we could do it legally to, kind of for bonuses for police to encourage, to put us a step above some of the other communities?
Well, the guidelines are really, the premium pay was for people that were performing the services at the time of the pandemic, who, because of their job, couldn't, they had to. And, I don't know exactly what the start date and is for all of our officers or who was doing what, but I guess we would have to look at those numbers to see what could be done. I mean, it just depending on when people were working for us, if they were working during particularly that heightened time. Yeah. But if they weren't, then I think it would be really hard to do the premium pay under the current Treasury guidelines. 1 and 2 very clearly, I think, meet the criteria.
I don't recall off the top of my head, no.
I have it. And the recall.
I can't recall with certainty. I want to say there were either 2 or 3, but don't quote me on it, please.
So
Go ahead.
just a clarifying for Pete, sorry. So what Pete is saying is offering something for the people that are currently here, but you're saying if they weren't here during the pandemic, it's really difficult to say, we're going to pay you extra because you're here now, or create an incentive now when this was.
Right. So the ARPA funds were for frontline workers that were working, in that kind of.
Yeah.
Right. So if someone came in, well after that, then it's just, that's not what was contemplated under the Treasury guidelines.
Thank you.
I know we're running out of time here,
Yeah.
but I do think in fairness to Habitat for Humanity, we need to know what we're actually saving them. And so I would like to have that information before we make a decision on this total amount. And we're probably running out of time to do that anyway. I like the ideas that have come up and, kind of prorating things, and it's a good idea. But in fairness to Habitat, we need to know how much money we're saving them. Because we're doing these, if we do these 2 projects here, maybe 50,000 in each project is going to be savings to Habitat. I don't know, somewhere in there probably, maybe more.
You're saying, and then we wouldn't have to fund them for number 3 because we were doing number 4.
Well, I kind of got the feeling that Peter says we shouldn't do number 3.
Got it.
That's so I'm backing off of that. If we could do number 3, I'd say just give them $100 for number 3 and let it go at that. But that'd be the simplest thing to do. The other is more complicated, but I think it's a really noble effort on the part of our administration to help Habitat. Because we were kind of door was shut for doing the other number 3.
In
More information's come on, so I guess we have new opportunity.
the thought of time, what we do is, I think that jumping off point, so when it comes before council, we have a discussion point. I'm not saying yes or no to anything, but Brandon's put out some numbers. It's a good starting point where we can discuss each one or as a package and go from there. And then we can come up and do these up and downs, or, things like what Council President Bryson pointed out, how she would like to see it, and have that discussion, just because we're running out of time to put it when it comes back to us on the agenda.
Just do 1 and 2.
No, we can't vote on anything today.
I know we can't do anything.
So if we have some indication of things though you'd be interested in funding, for instance, like 1 and 2, we could come back to you at least the next council meeting and simply ask for approval on those. But then, of course, that still leaves quite a bit of money on the table because that's not going to take up very much of what's remaining, but we can certainly do that.
Yeah, given the amount of time that we have left here, I think we should focus on our way forward and not making specific decisions. I think that since it sounds like is there a consensus on 1 and 2 that we are going to fund those? Because we can cross those off the list
then
and
we
bring
can-
those back
right.
next.
Yeah. Jeanette?
Yeah, yes, I'm sorry, the internet's a little lagging. So I would love to see more projects like the food cart project be funded versus the pay increase. So, I mean, I think that is, helps our economy, it helps our community, and, is there any talk on that, about that project?
No,
don't
it
think the
doesn't meet the ARPA.
Yeah, I don't
funding
think the food
requirements.
cart pod would be eligible.
Okay.
we-
So I agree with everybody as far as it seems like we're not gonna make a decision tonight, but I do agree with number 1 and number 2 to be funded.
Okay, is everybody in, Mr. Mayor?
Yeah, go ahead. Everyone, 1 and 2, is everyone good with bringing that on the agenda?
Yes.
Okay, so
Okay.
1 and 2 are going to be removed and those 2 items are going to be brought back at next count. Okay.
Yes.
And so as far as the remaining ones go, maybe just a table with these in them with a percentage or something, because it sounds like there's a disagreement on removing any of these from what I understand, and maybe we just
Yeah,
go off of the percentages or have a further discussion about that at the next council meeting.
yeah, just a separate agenda item for those items. So we can try to hone in on what we want to do. All right, it's 7 o'clock. I've got to end the meeting, so we can go into the